I am Ed Wimmer, Public Relations Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, welcoming you to U.S. Farm Forum.
U.S. Farm Report, a public information program brought to you in the interest of agriculture, rural business, and the well-being of our nation by the members of the National Farmers Organization. In this area and others interested in having American agriculture receive a cost of production plus a reasonable profit. The American farmers and ranchers are building a brighter future for agriculture through the National Farmers Organization, the organization that awoke America and represents the leadership in agriculture. U.S. Farm Report features as special guest Mr. Ed Wimmer, Public Relations Director for the National Federation of Independent Businessmen, which is over 240,000 member Main Street merchants. To visit with Mr. Wimmer will be Ray J. Anderson, NFO member from Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, Mrs. Will McElwain, 7th District NFO Public Relations Chairwoman from Graceville, Minnesota, and Arnold Thompson, Kitson County NFO Publicity Chairman, Donaldson, Minnesota. Now, to direct the questioning is Ray Anderson.
Mr. Wimmer, as spokesman for the Independent Businessmen of America, I would like to have you tell me how you feel about the lack of purchasing power is caused by low farm prices, and what the correlation between this is and the small-town businessman.
Well, of course, as representing so many small businesses, and so many of them going out of business today, particularly in our rural areas, we feel that if the family farm isn't brought back into the picture, and if he isn't given a profit for what he produces, as NFO is seeking to do in their collective bargaining, that we are going to lose a lot more members among the independent businessmen and the bankers than we are now losing. And we go into some of our rural communities where we had as many as maybe 200 members or 50 or 40 members. In our men report at the end of each year, a reduction of from 10 to 20 to 30% in the number that are in business. Why, I can say with authority that rural America is in a pretty bad spot, and when the farmer is in a bad spot, so is the independent merchant and all of his suppliers, whether they're big or little, but principally the wholesalers and the jobbers, the brokers and the retailers and that sort of thing. We have members in our organization of all kinds, of both business and professional, so we feel it probably a lot more than we would than just answering your question as far as the independent retail merchants are concerned.
Thank you, Ed. Mrs. McElwain, there have been various commissions, blue ribbon commissions, food and fiber commissions, CED reports, and so forth. Now, normally, I would feel that if we wanted a diagnosis of a medical situation, we would involve doctors. If we wanted a legal clarification, we would ask lawyers. Do you feel that this same pattern has been followed in analyzing agriculture, Mrs. McElwain?
No, I'm afraid not. It kind of brings to mind when you say the word diagnosis. I believe we have so many fragmented experts working on the body, no one has looked yet to see if he's still living. We have very many people who have made comments to the effect that agriculture must still continue to shift resources from manpower to more capital, and yet more capital simply is not available to the farmer unless it is through borrowed capital, and of course this can only last just so long. I have had the opportunity to speak with 3 members of the Food and Fiber Commission that made their report late last summer, and the question I put to them was this: 2 million farmers could be absorbed into the metropolitan areas, not easily perhaps, but they could be absorbed if these were the only people who were moving. But with 2 million farmers leaving the land, you then are moving, besides the 2 million farmers, his family, and then the businessmen who would be serving this person. I asked them what did they think would happen to a large exodus of people, which would maybe come closer to 30 million people, when they had to be absorbed into the metropolitan areas. The first 2 that I asked this of gave me no answer at all. The third one was Mr. Roscoe Haney, who spoke at the Minneapolis Farm Forum early this spring, and his reply was that he felt that farm decline, or say rural area decline, was due more to ease of transportation than the fact that we had a declining number of farmers. I was most surprised at this because we haven't just recently gotten the car or the truck or the railroad. If this were the case, I think that the decline of farm families in the rural areas and businessmen would have started taking place a long time ago. This didn't come into the picture until farmers were grossly unpaid. So this bothers me. These people, to me, have a great blind spot. Mr. Wimmer, do you seem to get this kind of reaction yourself? What do you think?
Well, we try to look at this thing from a much broader front than probably just the farm front. For example, a society is only as free as the number of independent units that is operating within the society, whether it is independent farmers, independent businessmen, independent professional people, or whether it's young people striking out on their own on the farm or in the avenues of business. Now, you can't hurt any one segment of our society. You can't hurt the independent retailer badly without hurting the wholesalers, the jobbers, the brokers, the small manufacturers, and the big manufacturers, and the rural area. Now, that same thing goes for the family farm. You can't harm the family farm without harming every single segment of our society, whether it is banks or whether it is children growing up that need education and everything. Now, I find as I get around the country, these past few months, especially since NFO had this tremendous rally of 35,000 in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was a speaker at that convention, and I saw these people arriving in school buses and in every kind of a conveyance and getting off there at Des Moines and at that great convention. And there weren't any banquets, there wasn't any entertainment. They came from all over, and they left their land at a time when they should have been doing something about their crops. They listened to 5-hour speeches. They got back on their buses and in their school buses and cars and headed back for home. Now, I felt that the 35,000 turnout that time of NFO was the first real evidence that we had an honest-to-goodness fight going to save the family farm in America. And, of course, as a spokesman for the independent businesses and professional men, and always including the family farm in all of my speeches, this generated my batteries to such an extent that I've been talking to farm organizations every week since the NFO meeting in Des Moines. And even though there is still a great amount of defeatism in agriculture and among the businessmen, that we're not going to get out of this thing, that defeatism is being lessened, I am positive, every day. And the communications between the farmer and the independent businessman, in all businesses, in fact, and the communications between the family farm, I think, and the people in the town, has been improved probably 1,000% since that meeting in Des Moines and the big rally in Louisville.
Yes, Ed, and thanks. I spent considerable time last February out in western states organizing new area for NFO. And I found also that there was a considerable interest, not just on the part of farmers, but on the part of businessmen, newspapermen, and others in the small towns to learn what this program is about. Arnold Thompson, would you comment on the urgency of this and the feeling of people towards this program?
Well, I'm real happy for dedicated men like Ed Wimmer that has come in to help in this organization. Some farmers still use this old gag of, I'm going to wait and see if it works. Now, if everybody waited to see if it would work, would anything be accomplished in any field? We lose a farmer every 5 minutes, day and night, around the clock. This is urgent. I'd ask non-members this question: what assurance do you have that dedicated NFO members and dedicated men like Mr. Wimmer, Mr. Paulson, and others will still be carrying your battle, and I said your battle, even a year from now? Now, if you're not willing to get in and partially carry the load now, what would you do if the entire load was dumped on your shoulders? Now, we're not asking you to dump your present farm organization. We're asking you to keep that. Keep your membership in your present organization, but join the NFO and work with us. Think carefully on this. We're anti-no one. We're just asking you to get in and fight to save what is left of rural America. We have a legitimate cause.
Well, thank you, Ed. Now, there are those who like to think big, and we must all do that. But the newest and the biggest thinking comes on talking of production units instead of farms. A economist from one of our universities in the upper Midwest predicted some time ago that 50 to 100,000 production units could feed this country, or produce 80 to 90% of our food and fiber. Let's average this out and say 50,000 in the 50 states. This would leave 1,000 per state, and in the state where I come from would amount to about 12 farmers per county. You can see what this would do to rural America. Mrs. McElwain, would you like to add any comment to this?
Yes, I think that perhaps a quote from the forward in the last publication, Food Costs and Farm Prices, which is put out by the Committee of Agriculture in the House of Representatives in July 1967, would probably answer this about as well as anything. Possibly 4 great farming corporations might well be able to produce all the food and fiber we need, but they would certainly never do it for anything like the small percent of the consumer's disposable income, which between 3 and 4 million farmers are now getting. Therefore, it is important for city people to understand that all of us will suffer if we fail to appreciate the work, the problems, and the needs of agriculture. We need to pay our farmers enough to make it possible for them to feed and clothe our cities. So I think that, and this is signed then by W.R. Pogue, chairman, I would like to ask Mr. Wimmer if this doesn't open up another vein of thought that we need to be very much concerned with, and that is to have the consumer relate or identify to the so-called farm problem, which is really a national problem and has been misnomered.
Well, I'd like to answer that in a little bit different way than probably you have brought the question up. I've had great confidence in the sportsmanship and, excuse me, and the fairness of the American people. They won't stand for any unfairness in sports, any kind of a game at all. Some of our things like wrestling, for example, has gone way down because of the fact that it doesn't have any rules. And if the marketplace doesn't have any rules of fair play and the consumer continues to accept it and to be willing to not do anything about it, and in fact, even approve of it if they think they're saving some money, this is the feeling that they have toward the consuming public. I don't believe that this is true. I think that when the people find out, understand that we are operating and supposed to be a nation of profit. We're a profit economy. That if a businessman doesn't make a profit, he isn't going to be able to improve his place of business. He can't contribute to the various activities that is going on in his community, and he doesn't pay any taxes. Now, the farmer is the only producer that there is in the United States today that everybody tells him what they're going to pay, and he brings his products to town, and what does he find? In Easter and at Christmas and New Year's, he finds the big chains and discounters using turkeys as baits, and he finds that monopoly is rising up on all hands to direct the buying of his beef and buying of pork and the controlling of egg prices and everything. And I feel that one of the things we've got to have, and we've been talking about this for so many years, and it's just now beginning to crystallize in Congress, and that is that no farm product should be used as a consistent bait. We used to have small chicken farms. Every direction that you'd look, you'd find a small chicken farm. And how many people today are members of Congress? They're in the Supreme Court even, and they're in all high offices all over the country that were educated on the earnings of a family farm. Well, today you couldn't put a boy through kindergarten or a girl through kindergarten on the earnings of the average family farm. Now, if we're going to be a profit country, certainly the principal segment of our economy, which is agriculture, if it is operating at a loss, the whole country is going to operate at a loss. And all these taxes that we're paying and the debts that we're building up and the crazy civil rights riots and all that sort of thing, I think it is all related to the breakdown of agriculture. And my feeling is that when the man on the farm is sick, the man on Main Street's going to be sick, the man in Wall Street's going to be sick, and the man on Constitution Avenue is going to be particularly sick if this agricultural question isn't solved.
Thank you, Ed, and I agree with you. And I would like to add a little to this. About 2 years ago, I was down in Venezuela, one of 6 American farmers that spent 6 weeks in that fine country. They told us many times that their farm problem was a social problem, and this is just what you have referred to. Now, in Venezuela, they told us also that they went from a dictatorship to a republican form of government similar to ours via the ballot box. And this was accomplished on the promise of agrarian land reform, which they have carried out. They started with the importal feudal system of Europe. We started with the homestead system in the United States, which was the small farmer proving up on the tract of land. In the past 2 years, I have been fortunate in having a group of Venezuelan people come back and repay the visits that we made down there. And I want to read what the group report said about the family farm. We suspect that the greatness of this country stems in part from the farm family nucleus, wherein the joint efforts of the mother, the father, and the sons have established this group within the middle class. This is the very grassroots, then, of our democracy. And it was wonderful to me to realize the insight of these people. They could come here and spend the month and ferret out what a lot of people in leadership in this country apparently can't see. Mrs. McElwain, I would like to ask you if you have, as a shopper for the family, noted the ups and downs of farm prices. Are they reflected in the food prices?
No, I don't feel they have been. I know there are times when we have sold cattle, sold pigs on the market, and our price would be down, but it wouldn't be down in the stores. I am told that there is such a thing as consumer resistance, and when you are acclimated or used to a certain price range, that this is where they try to keep it. So you see, if they would drop the price down to reflect the lower prices at farm level, they might incur some resistance when they would raise it again. I think that this, in part, is part of the answer. I think that the farm income itself, as you look at it from a gross national point of view, as ours has decreased, the cost of food in an overall, say as you take it through the checkout stand, it continues to rise. Now, food cost was the only item in the cost of living index in 1967 which decreased. The other things, such as doctor bills, cars, well, any other item has gone up, but the food cost decreased. So therefore, the family farmer was subsidizing to an extent the consumers when they buy their food. I think that it is something that will have to be corrected if the people want to continue to have an ample food supply at a reasonable cost, as it has been in the past. You can't have one industry forever taking the shock and not having this finally collapse. I wish that there were some investigations to find out why some of these trends and why some of these things develop as they do. It seems like it is very hard to make people understand that in reality farm prices are done in reverse because of the huge volume chain stores handle. About 25 top chains handle about 85% of the food in this country. Therefore, their volume buying, they may dictate what they will pay. And on the other end, the consumer pays what the price tag is.
Now, can I interrupt you, Ray?
Yes.
I'd partly agree with what you said about the lower costs, the lower prices that the farmer get not being reflected in the grocery basket. But a lot of this is due to the monopolistic conditions which you're talking about, like, for instance, 8 chains buying 50% of the beef, for example, in the United States. All of these have their effects. But I was in a meat packer's place of business recently, and he surprised me by saying, because I hadn't heard the way he had put it before, and he said that if the farmer hadn't subsidized the consuming public for the last several years, with all of the low income that he has gotten, if he hadn't subsidized the general public, that the riots in the ghettos would have been much worse than they are now. Now, I do believe that this low farm income has had a certain reflection in prices. Now, there are areas where some of the giant businesses particularly have profited tremendously from the farm losses. And a lot of these people that don't understand this thing, for instance, the independent merchant that was antagonistic to the farmer, and the farmer is antagonistic to the independent merchant. Neither one of them stopped to realize that here they were, both in a rural community, that all the salesmen, wholesalers, jobbers, brokers, and the people that are selling, the equipment dealers, for example, all have to come out to all of these rural towns to do this selling to these merchants and to these farmers. If there is a half a dozen great big farms around any kind of an area at all, there's nobody comes to that town to sell them anything. Most of them buy direct. Where the family farm has to have personal contacts, the independent merchant has to have personal contacts, the big manufacturers, the little manufacturers. So our entire economy, to me, is like the farmer's like a hub, or the independent merchant's like the hub of a wheel. All the spokes are all of these other suppliers and small businessmen and the workers in the factories and the workers on the farms and everything. Take away the independent farmer, and you take away the independent merchant, and then you take away the independent bank, you have nothing left of democracy at all. And this, is, to me, is the big issue that the people should be thinking about. And as I said before, I just don't believe that the mothers of America want to see these farm boys brought to the cities, and only 1 out of every 10 that are now on the farms will be on the farms in 1971 if this thing continues. And I don't think that the mothers of America want to see their boys standing with their hat in their hand with no place to go except a great big labor union or a great big government or a great big giant business in order to find a place for their future. So this fight to save the family farm is not a fight of the family farmer. It's part of his fight, and he's the one that is most vitally affected. But this is a battle to save the American heritage, in my opinion.
Yes, I believe you're right, Ed. I ran into a situation out west last February where a businessman suggested that if the price of wheat were to double, it would mean that the price of a loaf of bread would have to go up double. I asked him if he subscribed also then that if we gave the wheat away, he would get the loaf of bread free at the store. Then he saw the fallacy of his thinking. It would have changed the loaf of bread about 3 cents either way. If we doubled the price of wheat, it would increase from the standpoint of the cost of the ingredient, 3 cents a loaf. If we gave the wheat, it would drop the price, 3 cents a loaf. Arnold, as a supplier of the funds for your wife's shopping, how would you feel about this subject? We've all covered it, and I think you should.
Well, we recently had a display in a hobby show that fit very well with what you said. Excuse me. We had a package of puffed wheat on display there. That puffed wheat at retail brought in, or cost the consumer, $61.44. The farmer got paid $1.50 for that wheat. There is absolutely no comparison between what the farmer gets and what the consumer pays. I'd also like to mention at this point, in regards to prices at the store, some time ago there was a holding action on milk. The farmer was asking for 2 cents a quart for his milk. Well, since that time, of course, milk has gone up several cents a quart, which proves, of course, that the price was justified. It also proves that the consumer would pay the price. The question I'd like to ask, who got the additional money? I know that the farmer didn't. And again, when you go to the store and you ask about these prices, quite often they are told that it's the farmer that's causing these things. Now, this is very, very unfair.
Thank you, Arnold. There is a piece in the Scripture that tells us that every laborer is worthy of his hire. And while society has been taught to bless the Lord for the crops that he provides for our use, it seems society has never learned the transgression of this divine law that occurs when they undervalue the Lord's blessing in the marketplace. We have often been told that we should be businessmen, and I would like your feelings on this, Arnold.
This is a very good point, because this is one that is pushed at us so often. Be a good businessman. Did you ever hear of a business that opened up its store and said, come in here, shop in my store. I'm not putting any prices on. Just pay what you wish. Just how long do you think that merchant would be in business? Would he be in business overnight? And still, we as farmers are expected to accept those prices for what we have to sell. Remember, we have a cost on our production. Remember, farmers are consumers also, the greatest of all consumers. We're concerned about the cost of the product also.
Well, thanks, Ed. Now it leaves a question of who is going to raise the food in the future. When your youngsters plan their future, don't they look for a field of endeavor that they feel that they can enjoy working at, but yet one that must provide a decent standard of living for them? The question then boils down to where are they going to find their opportunities? In the jungles where 70% of the people live on a little over 1% of the land, or in the healthy climate of rural America? Mr. Wimmer, would you like to make any closing remarks here?
Well, I'd like to just comment a little bit on what Arnold said, and you've been calling him Ed during this program here, so we don't want to confuse the audience too much. For example, we had 12,000 independent dairies not too many years ago. Today we got about 750. Now, when the increase in the milk came up this time before, the dairyman was going broke. He couldn't pay his taxes. He couldn't meet the union demand. So this increase didn't give him a single penny of extra profit. All it did was to save him just a little bit longer until the next milk war or something. Now, when the independent businessman, he feels he has nobody to fight except the small farmer. He can't fight the big corporation. And the small farmer feels like he's got to fight the small businessman because he can't fight the great big monopoly. This thing has all got to be turned around, in my estimation. And the doctor, for example, he didn't have anybody supporting him. Now he's in socialized medicine up to his neck. If he'd had more public relations like NFO is trying to do among the farmers and among the people, the doctor wouldn't be up to his neck in socialized medicine. So agriculture, I think, depends a great deal on what your organization is doing to carry on this fight. And I compliment you tremendously.
Don't you think that the farmer and the labor man has a great deal in common, regardless of what they say to the opposite?
I think everybody in this audience has got a stake in what we're doing today.
Well, my sincere thanks to the members of the panel and to all fine people out in TV land for tuning in our U.S. Farm Report. And for a closing statement, I would like to remind you that the so-called farm problem is a far-reaching social problem affecting us all. We urge you to help solve it by supporting the efforts of NFO to get an equitable return in agriculture and keeping the roots of democracy, the family farm, strong. Remember, what is good for the farmers is good for industry, for labor, and for everyone. We are all part of the United States of America. United we stand, divided we fail.
U.S. Farm Report has presented as a special guest Mr. Ed Wimmer, Public Relations Director for the National Federation of Independent Businessmen from Covington, Kentucky. The panelists were Ray J. Anderson, Mrs. Willis McElwain, and Arnold Thompson, NFO members from the state of Minnesota. Members of the National Farmers Organization invite you to tune in again next week at the same time for more facts on agriculture and rural America, which is the gear wheel in our economy that produces the majority of our nation's new wealth. The farm income pattern sets the nation's prosperity, and the National Farmers Organization represents new thinking in a new generation of agricultural producers.